Jeremiah chapter 16. This is a short but interesting chapter in which the Lord commands the prophet Jeremiah in looking forward to the times of the captivity. Jeremiah is asked to abstain from the common practices of mankind and is instructed to adopt a different lifestyle so as to warn the people of the greatness of the approaching calamity. Though the Lord pronounces great evils in this chapter, the chapter closes in sweet promises concerning the deliverance of his people. In this chapter, we have 1. Jeremiah's call to live as a sign of the coming judgment, verses 1 to 9. 2. The justice of God in these judgments, verses 10 to 13. 3. Future restoration of the Jews and the conversion of the Gentiles, verses 14 to 21. Jeremiah commanded to not take a wife or to father children, verses 1 to 4. Verse 1. The word of the Lord came also unto me, saying. This introduces a new and distinct message extending to Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 18, and is one even more terrible in its threatenings than any that have preceded it. Verse 2. Thou shalt not take thee a wife, neither shalt thou have sons or daughters in this place. Marriage was obligatory among the Jews. Undoubtedly, the Lord's command for Jeremiah not to marry was an emotional shock to him.
You shall not take a wife, nor shall you have sons or daughters.
What? Why?
For all the children and the mothers shall die a grievous death in this land, because their fathers have not kept my law.
Lord, you cannot burden me with this!
Fruitfulness was promised as a blessing under the law. Deuteronomy 28:4. The law of man's creation was increase and multiply. Genesis 1:22, Genesis 8:17 and Genesis 9:1. Moreover, in ancient Jewish culture, it was a shame and a dishonor to be single and childless. So, this command of not to marry went against the general will of God for his people and against the strong cultural traditions of the Jewish people. Marriage is the preservation of human race. Mankind is perpetuated by marriage. Children are needed to continue a man's name for futurity. But here, on the contrary, God intended to show the Jews that the land was unworthy of this blessing enjoyed and they deserved to be exterminated from the earth. In verse 3, God opens the reason why Jeremiah was forbidden to marry and multiply relations. God wanted the people to understand that the affliction would be so horrible and unbearable in Jerusalem that a wife and children would only increase care, concern and sorrow. This was a warning to the people that the family life of the nation was to be disrupted. Paul in 1 Corinthians 7 to 9, 26 to 35 and Jesus in Matthew 24:19 also advise that it is wise for all to abstain from marriage in times of distress. Verse 4. They shall die of grievous deaths. They shall not be lamented, neither shall they be buried. God shows that in evil times, those who multiply relations also multiply sorrows and afflictions to themselves. Either the parents or children or both should die of grievous deaths in the calamity, since that was determined by the Lord concerning them. They shall not be lamented, neither shall they be buried. This is usually done for the dead by their surviving relations. They mourn for the dead and express their grief and extremest misery by various gestures and take care that they have a decent burial. But neither of these would now be done, for the dead body shall be as dung upon the face of the earth, which is mentioned as an aggravation of the calamity. And they shall be consumed by the sword and by famine, and their carcasses shall be meat for the fowls of heaven and for the beasts of the earth. This signifies God's just retaliation for their filthy and abominable actions committed in the land. It shows that not only would their death by sword and famine be grievous, but also their carcasses would be meat for the fowls of heaven and for the beasts of the earth. This may be for one of the below reasons. 1. Death would be so widespread and fast from all ranks and ages that men shall have no time to bury them. Or 2. There shall not be a sufficient number left alive to bury the dead and lament for them. Or 3. Because they would be so concerned for their own safety and preservation that they would not be concerned to finish the formalities for the dead. Jeremiah commanded to not mourn with others. Verses 5 to 7. Verse 5. For thus saith the Lord, enter not into the house of mourning, neither go to lament, nor bemoan them. Not going to a house of mourning was regarded as criticism. Here, God asked Jeremiah not to go into the house of mourning to join with friends and relations in their formal expressions of mourning, since God Himself had withdrawn their prosperity and peace and His loving kindness and mercies. Jeremiah was denied the blessing of serving the sorrowing. Verse 6. Nor cut themselves, nor take themselves bald. These are rites of self-mutilation by the mourners. The law forbade the Israelites to make any cuttings in their flesh at funeral obsequies. Leviticus 19:28, Deuteronomy 14:1. Notwithstanding this prohibition, this practice seems to have been adopted by the Jews among other heathenish customs. Jeremiah 41:45, Ezekiel 7:18, and Micah 1:16. When the coming judgment struck Judah, none of the mourning practices would be observed. Verse 7. Neither shall men give them the cup of consolation to drink for their father or for their mother. It means that a cup of good liquor or strong mingled wine to comfort, console, and cheer the relatives of the dead would not be done. The calamity would be so great and so universal that there will be none to do such offices as these. Proverbs 31:6. Jeremiah commanded to not feast with others. Verses 8-9. Just as Jeremiah was commanded to detach himself from normal family relationships and expressions of public mourning, so he was also to detach himself from public celebrations. All these were done as signs of the coming judgment. It would be unseasonable to eat and drink when God's wrath is being poured out on the land. The meaning is that the people were given up to destruction, so nothing was better than to depart from them as far as possible. Verse 9. For thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, Behold, I will cause to cease out of this place in your eyes and in your days the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voice of the bridegroom and the voice of the bride. When the crisis of judgment came upon Judah, there will be no gladness or wedding celebrations. God in His providence is about to put an end to all civil mirth in their days. As a sign, Jeremiah was to live in his present day as if the judgment had already come. The justice of God in these judgments. Verses 10-13. Verse 10. And it shall come to pass, when thou shalt shew this people all these words, and they shall say unto thee, Wherefore hath the Lord pronounced all this great evil against us? Or, what is our iniquity? Or, what is our sin that we have committed against the Lord our God? This verse has a language of quarrel in the Hebrew language. Instead of humbling and condemning themselves, these rebellious people try to conceal their own sins, justify themselves, and murmur against God's judgments as though God did them wrong and had no just cause to punish them. A plain and full answer is given in verses 11-13. The verbs used here are part of the distinctive vocabulary used to describe the breach of the Mosaic covenant. Significantly, it was not merely the breach of that holy covenant by the forefathers of Israel that led to the deportation from Canaan, but that the current generation also had sinned even beyond the outrageous behavior of their ancestors. The consequence of idolatry persisted in through many generations until it has finally deepened into national apostasy. The collective guilt of their fathers and their own generation had brought Judah to their soon-to-come judgment. Therefore, they deserved a great evil of punishment pronounced against them. Verse 13. There shall ye serve other gods day and night. They shall be exposed to the peril of being seduced by the Chaldeans to the worship of idols, for God will ignore them. There they may serve those idols that they were so mad about and without intermission, day and night. I will not show you favor. This was a cutting speech contrary to the sweet promise in Zechariah 10:6. They shall be as though I had not cast them off, for I am the Lord their God and will hear them. The harsh speech of God now is far worse than their captivity itself. The wonderful promise of restoration from exile, verses 14-15. Therefore, behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that it shall no more be said, The Lord liveth that brought up the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt. But the Lord liveth that brought up the children of Israel from the land of the north and from all the lands whither he had driven them, and I will bring them again into their land that I gave unto their fathers. God sweetens the words of despair and dreadful threatenings in verses 1-13 by a wonderful and gracious promise of redemption and restoration. Judgment and mercy are tempered in the promise. The Lord announced that the time would come when the chosen people would no longer look back on the Exodus as the great demonstration of God's preservation and deliverance, but would rather cherish and look on their restoration from the Babylonish captivity. Their deliverance from the power of the king of Egypt was accompanied by terrifying miracles by the Lord. It was a physical redemption. As of this day, this was considered by Israel as the greatest redemption. On the other hand, we have the Babylonian captivity. The chastisement in captivity was more terrible than the bondage in the iron furnace Egypt. But on God's command, the deliverance was voluntarily granted by the Babylonian king Cyrus, a far greater king than the king of Egypt. The deliverance out of captivity was a figure of great salvation and spiritual redemption. Since the latter was in several respects more remarkable than the former, it would abolish the remembrance of their deliverance from Egypt so much that the Egyptian bondage shall not be spoken of and celebrated so much as the deliverance from the captivity in Babylon. There is a valuable spiritual analogy here. The initial work of redemption in the life of a believer is great, but the restoring work of the believer, when God brings the chastened child of his out of the metaphorical exile and back into his favor and promise, is regarded as even greater. This is the principle God revealed to Jeremiah. The zeal of God in pursuing the people ripe for judgment, verses 16-18. Verse 16. Behold, I will send for fishers, saith the Lord, and they shall fish them. And after will I send for many hunters, and they shall hunt them from every mountain and from every hill and out of the holes of the rocks. Here the prophet returns to denounce threatenings. The metaphor of the hunters and the fishers is used to describe the thoroughness and completeness of the Babylonian destruction of apostate Israel. God will find out and raise up instruments of his wrath, and they shall destroy the Jews, either 1. By fraud and wiles like fishers. Fishers expresses the ease of their victory over the Jews as that of the angler over fishes. The Chaldeans, by the secret instinct of God's providence, besieged Jerusalem and enclosed them in a net, and took them as fishes in the net. Habakkuk 1:14. It was a reference to deportation. 2. By force and violence like hunters. Hunters expresses the keenness of their pursuit of them into every cave and nook. After pursuing the scattered parties, they will search them like hunters who would ferret out the individual survivors until none escape. The Chaldeans used all the methods of secret stratagem like fishers and open force like hunters to make the Jews their prey. These two similitudes imply that the Chaldeans should make an entire conquest of the whole land and strip it of its riches and inhabitants. There is another interpretation which says that the Egyptians will first come secretly as fishers to invade Judah, and then the Babylonians will come as hunters to sweep away the rest. The Egyptians are famous for fishing since they lived much on fish. The Chaldeans were famous for hunting. Nimrod, the first founder of the Babylonian Empire, was a mighty hunter. Genesis 10:9. First fishing by Egyptians and then hunting by the Chaldeans refers to the successive invaders of Judea. Verse 17 says that this chastisement is decreed by the Lord upon full knowledge and examination of their doings. The iniquities of Israel have not escaped the all-seeing eye of the Lord, neither their ways could be concealed from the face of the Lord. None can hide himself in secret places that they should not be seen by him. The darkness and the light are both alike to the omniscient God. Verse 18. And first I will recompense their iniquity and their sin double, because they have defiled my land. They have filled mine inheritance with the carcasses of their detestable and abominable things. This is a punishment fit the crime. A restitution or fine to double the amount of the wrong done was almost the normal standard of punishment under the law of Moses. Exodus 22:4-7. Paying back double. It may be an expression indicating proportionate payment, making the punishment equivalent to the crime, or it may be a hyperbole for full payment. Various interpretations have been given for this. 1. I will recompense double, that is 2 times, in allusion to the Babylonian and Roman captivities. 2. I will recompense their former iniquities and the repetition of them. 3. Amply and fully in full payment by the Lord's judgmental hand. Isaiah 42, Jeremiah 17:18. Because they have defiled my land. This explains one reason why exile was an appropriate answer to Judah's deeply sinful condition. Carcasses of their detestable and abominable things. It means one of the following. 1. Jeremiah styles the idols as the representations of dead men, since idols were only like carcasses without life. The word may be used in scorn of the lifeless form of the dumb idols which the people worshipped. By a touch of them, one gets unclean, as by contact with corpse. Numbers 19:11. 2. The sacrifices which were made to idols. Not sweet-smelling sacrifices acceptable to God, but carcasses of human victims and unclean animals offered to idols, an offensive order to God. Leviticus 26:30 and Isaiah 65:4. The Lord is glorified among the Gentiles. Verses 19-21. This is a prophecy of the conversion of the Gentiles. Despite the gloom of Judah's condition and their impending judgment, Jeremiah still found strength and refuge in the Lord. The words speak of a returning confidence in the prophet's mind, an echo of Psalm 18:2, or more closely Psalm 28:1 and 8, Psalm 59:17 and 2 Samuel 22:3. Jeremiah comforts himself with the thoughts of those good days that were coming, when not only would the Gentiles help in restoring God's people from their exile, but they would also come from all parts of the world confessing that they had inherited lies and vanity from their fathers, and that their dumb idols that both they and their fathers worshipped were unprofitable. What a wonderful repentant testimony of the Gentiles. Verse 20. Shall a man make gods unto himself, and they are not gods? When the Gentiles are enlightened by the truth of the one God, and when they come to know that the idols are not really gods, they would be asking if someone could be so silly to make false gods. Verse 21. Therefore, behold, I will this once cause them to know. I will cause them to know mine hand and my might, and they shall know that my name is the Lord. When the Gentiles shall be convinced of the vanity and falsehood of their idols, God promised a mighty revelation of His power and greatness to the Gentiles. This promise was fulfilled in the display of God's power and love through the work of Jesus Christ. In that way, the nations would come to know that His name is the Lord. Jeremiah chapter 16, questions and answers.